Let's be honest, we've all been there, right? Stuck in a mandatory all-day workshop that just feels like a complete waste of time. You get the little certificate at the end, but a week later, you've forgotten pretty much everything. Well, today, we are going to dig into the science of why that happens, and more importantly, what the research says actually makes workplace learning stick. Seriously, think about the last training session you had to go to. How much of it can you, right now, actually recall? If you're drawing a blank, you are definitely not alone. And look, this isn't some personal failing on your part. It's almost always a flaw in the design of the training itself. So, what is the big disconnect here?
Well, here's the problem. A lot of corporate training is built on myths, not on science. We get told over and over that we need to cater to so-called learning styles, or that the flashiest new technology is the key, or that cramming everything into a single, intense workshop is the most efficient way to learn. But you know what? The actual cognitive science tells a completely different and way more interesting story.
And this huge gap between belief and reality leads us straight into what we can call the training trap. It's this incredibly frustrating cycle where companies are spending billions of dollars on training that just doesn't work, and employees, well, we walk away feeling like our time was totally wasted. So how did we even get stuck in this trap? You might think this is a recent problem, a complaint for our modern, fast-paced world, but just look at the date on this quote, 1971. For over half a century, experts have been shouting from the rooftops that corporate training is often, and I quote, non-empirical, poorly written, and dull. We have been stuck in this exact same trap for a very, very long time.
Okay, so if we've known about this trap for 50 years, how do we finally get out of it? Well, the answer is to stop chasing fads and to start building our training on a really solid foundation, a science of instruction. It's all about understanding how our brains actually learn.
And to do that, we have to be super clear on what learning even is. It's not just about sitting through a PowerPoint. The scientific definition is crystal clear. If you can't keep the information and then use it when you actually need it, then learning just didn't happen. It really is that simple.
This learning pathway kind of shows us the whole chain of events. The training itself, that's just the first domino. The real magic, the part that actually matters, happens in step 2, the learning events happening inside your brain. That's where you're making connections and building real understanding. If that step fails, you never, ever get to the real-world results you want.
And that brings us to what might be the single most important idea in this entire explainer. Good training isn't about the presentation. It's not about the slides or the speaker. It's about influencing the learner's mental processes. It's about intentionally designing an experience that makes the brain do the heavy lifting. So how do we actually do that? How do we influence those mental processes? Well, lucky for us, science has given us a toolkit. Turns out there are 5 evidence-based keys to designing training that truly connects with how the brain works. So let's break them down. First up, we have to organize the content. I want you to think of it like this. Your brain is a giant library. If you just throw random facts at it, they're going to end up in a messy, useless pile on the floor. But if you give it a well-organized structure, a clear shelving system, it can store and find that information way more easily.
This means, for one, being coherent. You got to cut out those fun but irrelevant facts, because they're just noise. It also means using continuity, putting words and the pictures that explain them right next to each other, so the brain doesn't have to work extra hard to connect the dots. And it means using advanced organizers, which is basically just giving people a map of the territory before the journey begins.
And believe me, the data shows this is not a small thing. One huge analysis found that just following that simple contiguity principle, putting text right next to the image it describes, improves learning outcomes by about 10%. That is a massive boost from one tiny, super easy design choice.
Okay, the second key is all about optimizing the sequence. You see, it's not just what you teach, but when you teach it and in what order. Presenting material the right way and at the right time can be the difference between aha and huh. So what does this look like? Well, it involves things like scaffolding, which is kind of like using training wheels when you first learn to ride a bike and then taking them off as you get better. Or adaptive difficulty, where the training actually gets harder as you get better, just like leveling up in a video game. And there's a really powerful one called interleaving, which just means mixing up different kinds of problems instead of drilling the same thing over and over again. Third, and this is a really big one, you have to engage the learner. Learning is not a spectator sport. The brain isn't some passive sponge that just soaks up information. It's a muscle. And just sitting there passively listening is the absolute worst way to build that muscle. So how do you actually engage them?
Well, you use generative tasks, like having people explain an idea back in their own words. You prompt metacognition, which is just asking them to think about how they're learning. And, critically, you use retrieval practice. This is key. It means forcing the brain to pull information out, like with a short quiz, instead of just passively putting it in by rereading notes.
All right, our fourth principle is all about practice. But here's the thing, not all practice is created equal. Simply going through the motions is pretty much useless. How you practice matters just as much, if not more, than how often you do it. So what does good practice look like? Well, for one, it has variability. You apply the skill in different contexts. It's also spaced out over time. There was this famous study of postal workers that found those who practiced a little bit each day for several days retained their skills way, way better than those who crammed it all into one marathon session. And finally, it uses identical elements, meaning the practice should feel as close to the real job as possible.
And our fifth and final key is all about what to do after that first aha moment. True mastery, what scientists call automaticity, is when a skill becomes so deeply ingrained that you can do it without even thinking. But to get there, you have to keep practicing long after you think you've got it down.
This means getting clear feedback. And most importantly, it involves overlearning. You ever wonder how TED speakers look so completely effortless up on stage? Well, they reportedly practice for 70 hours for a 15-minute talk. They aren't just learning the material, they are practicing it past the point of perfection, so it becomes totally automatic, even under the bright lights. That, right there, is overlearning.
Okay, so now we have our 5 scientific principles. Let's actually put them to work. It's time to go back to those myths we started with and see how the real evidence just completely blows them out of the water.
Let's start with the biggest myth of them all, learning styles. This idea that you're a visual learner or an auditory learner is absolutely everywhere. But here's the thing, it's just not true. A massive scientific review in 2008 scoured all the research and found, and I'm quoting here, they were unable to find any evidence to support the idea. None.
So the takeaway here is really simple. Stop wasting time and money trying to cater to imaginary learning styles or even different age groups. Instead, just focus on good instructional design. The 5 principles we just walked through are universal. They work for everyone's brain, period.
So where does all this leave us? You know, in a world full of AI, virtual reality, and constant change, it might seem like these rules are a little old-fashioned. But actually, they've never been more important.
It really doesn't matter if the training is happening in a VR headset or on a smartphone app. The technology is just the delivery truck. What truly matters is the design behind it. The tools are always going to change, but the fundamentals of the human brain, they don't. These 5 principles are the timeless blueprint for effective learning, no matter what tech you're using.
And that leaves us with one final, kind of provocative question. Think about the really effective methods we discussed. Spaced practice, forcing yourself to retrieve information, mixing things up. They all feel harder than just kicking back and listening to a lecture. But what if that struggle, that feeling of effort, what if that's not a sign that you're doing it wrong? What if it's the only sign that real, lasting learning is actually happening?